Public interest in the last few years has increased very greatly in a phenomenon which has been identified as flying saucers. These stories have led to much fiction and much fancy. I would like to separate a few facts from some of the fiction that has been traveling around across the country.
In July 1947, something extraordinary crashed into the New Mexico desert. The Air Force contends that it was simply a weather balloon. However, scores of witnesses to the event insist it was spacecraft piloted by alien beings. The past several years, one of the most exhaustive investigations of a UFO event has been conducted, making the Roswell case the best documented in UFO history. One of the principal investigators of the case is Kevin Randall. Kevin has interviewed over 100 witnesses to the crash and recovery, allowing him to reconstruct the series of events.
The best evidence we have is the craft crashed between 11:17, 11:27 p.m. on the evening of July 4th. How's that for narrowing it down? That's based on a military log that was kept that I have seen. I've actually seen the log. Military moved in the next morning. Frank Kaufman talks about getting there while it's still dark. Other evidence suggests they got there after first light. I don't know. The craft was impacted in the ground. They were on the site on July 5th. Military cordon went up around that site, which is close to Highway 285 in Roswell, on July 5th. They had the bodies out of there by mid-morning, the craft out of there by the evening. They brought in experts in camouflage to disguise the area, rake it and change it so it would look like nothing had happened and disguise some of what had happened. July 6th, Mac Brazel comes into town with a box of metallic debris, part of the same thing, and the story slips back into the original telling of it. July 8th, Jesse Marcel is sent to Fort Worth with some of the debris for General Ramey to look at. The newspaper accounts come out on July 8th about the crash already being recovered up on the Brazel Ranch. Another military cordon around that area. They clean up the debris site within a couple of days, get out of that area by the 10th or 11th or 12th of July, and we're not sure of the exact timing because Bill Brazel, the son of the man, realized his dad needed help, came back to the ranch. By the time he got to the ranch, the following weekend, there was no sign of the military there. So what we have is an event that takes place on the evening of July 4th. Military recovers the craft and bodies on the 5th. Brazel talks about the debris field on the 6th. Marcel and Cavett go out on the 7th, come back to the base late on the evening of the 7th. The military cordon goes up around the debris field. It's cleaned up on the 8th. The newspaper articles come out on the 8th. Marcel goes to Fort Worth. By the 9th, the military is saying it was not a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. That, in a nutshell, is the story as we believe it happened.
The Roswell case is not like most UFO reports. Although no one actually saw the crash, dozens of people collected and transported debris. Direct and indirect confirmation of this event from these witnesses has resulted in a remarkable chapter of human history.
It's worse and worse and worse than people say that. All you got to do is drive out here about 40-some odd miles, and you'll see the damnest piece of wreckage. Well, hell, you know, it's just like everybody get in the car and see where the hell the fire is.
I was allowed to meet with the United States Counterintelligence Corps colonel who had been directly involved making sketches at the crash site at the time of recovery in the morning of July 5th, 1947.
What's his name?
His name is Frank Kaufman.
When he came forward, talked about seeing the craft, being on the scene when they first arrived, saw the craft impacted in the ground, saw the bodies, I think two of the bodies outside the craft, one leaning up against a cliff with a very serene look on its face, looking like it was asleep, but it was dead. He saw the bodies that he described as being 5 feet tall, the head slightly larger than a head on a human body, the eyes slightly larger than human eyes, the skin being a grayish tone. You can hear sometimes the emotion in his voice discussing this thing that he saw, and it was clear from his observations that others were disturbed by what they saw.
William Woody,
who was a young man, 10 or 12, living on a ranch farm, just south of Roswell, not too far away, who saw a bright object in the sky, which probably was this object coming down. And it was bright enough that it lit up the whole night. His father saw it, and they decided to go out the next day and look for it because they thought it was a meteorite that came down. And they drove north of town, and what did they see? They saw troops guarding the roads leading off the main road. And this is exactly where Kaufman puts the impact site.
Other witnesses came forward, other witnesses we found, corroborating parts of his story. The location, for example. Lewis Rickett, counterintelligence agent at Roswell, talks about a 45-minute drive.
I remember it took us about 45 minutes. I said, how far are we going out here? He said, well, just over this line here. He said, it's something I want to describe it to you. I just want you to see it. Then he said, we're talking about it.
He went to the site with Cabot, in fact. And if this was a mogul balloon, what Cabot told him, he wouldn't have told him, because mogul balloons were not that secret back then. Not to intelligence officers, they weren't. Cabot didn't say, oh, this was a mogul balloon. What he said to Rickett was, after they left the site, now remember, you've never been here today. Neither have I. We've never seen this.
When we began our research, we tried to look at alternative explanations. Was it a V-2 rocket? We were able to gather all the documentation for that. There are no launches missing that would account for the Brazel debris nor the impact site. Experimental aircraft, aircraft accidents, balloon tests. We looked at all of this. There was nothing there.
There was a very careful introduction made to a witness who was an air intelligence officer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1952. This air intelligence officer had a background in cryptography and in admin, and his job was to generate and disperse documents in regards to the final stages of the reverse engineering studies that had been attempted on the vehicle in the underground nuclear bomb storage pit that is in reality the source of the original Hangar 18 legend. That nuclear bomb storage pit was completely enclosed, and it is where this small, very small vehicle was stored. This witness was able, for a 3-month period in his life, to crawl through the interior of the wreckage, to walk around the wreckage, to examine it in detail. What was found in the desert in 1947 looked like modern-day wave rider designs that are on the drawing boards at Boeing and at Rockwell. This was in a time when nobody had ever even theorized a shockwave rider or a shockwave surfer at high speeds, high altitudes. This thing looked like a Stingray, and it had perfect blend between its crew cabin in its little fat fuselage and its, shall we say, rounded delta wing configuration. It was all one piece. There were no seams in the skin. There were no fasteners. There were no rivets. There were no lines of delineation between subcomponents. It was all one piece from the bow to the stern and from wingtip to wingtip. In the areas where the gash was, it was peeling in layers, like layers of an onion or layers of human flesh. It had a dipole waveguide structure that traveled up to the roof, which was at the gravitational center of the vehicle, and for which on the outside of the vehicle was kind of a dome or a elongated oblong-shaped gentle blister.
When considering the Roswell case, one basic question must be asked. If nothing out of the ordinary happened at Roswell, why the extraordinary efforts to conceal it? Why do people still fear for their lives, still afraid to talk after 50 years of silence?
If this happened, the sheriff was involved, and he seems to have been involved, because of course, after all, Brazel brought the material to the sheriff's office, so, of course he was involved. And after the event, of course, the sheriff, and his wife, whose name was Big Mama, did talk to their daughters and later their granddaughters about what happened. They didn't say too much, but they did indicate that they were told to keep it secret by the government. and that it was a big deal, and that there were bodies involved and strange debris, you know, just like we hear about, and that it was really a big deal, really secret.
She couldn't believe it. There were actually little people. She said they had very large heads and very big eyes, and she said they had some kind of shiny material on. And I can't remember if she said what color. I thought she said blue, but I really can't remember at this point. But she said it was so shiny, it was almost like it was fluid-like. And she said, and then she became very upset. And she goes, but you mustn't tell anybody. She goes, never tell anybody. And at this point, she would just keep looking around the room. She was very paranoid acting. And she said, because they can always find you. And I said to her, I said, who can always find you? She goes, the government can always find you.
There's only one way, I think, and we've talked about this endlessly here at the center, is that how Roswell could be kept secret. And I think the answer is that they made a conscious decision immediately to keep it extremely secret.